as I was recovering, my husband divorced me, married his girlfriend, and they sued me for custody of my son.
She was the queen of the 90s, assuming the world was hers for the taking. Sharon Stone was the woman with the most famous legs in cinema, the ice-cold interrogator who could dismantle a room with a single, unblinking stare. We watched her breathe life into the tragic, diamond-drenched desperation of Casino, giving us a performance of such raw, agonizing vulnerability that it redefined what a leading lady could be. But behind the diamond-encrusted smile and the legendary charisma, Sharon Stone lived a reality that would break anyone else. In early 2026, she is finally done with the act. She is breaking her silence on the marriage that almost destroyed her, the husband who walked away the moment she turned fragile, and the heartbreaking battle for her children. At her 68th birthday, Sharon Stone finally admits why she never looked back. Long before the world reduced her to a sex symbol, she was a terrifyingly brilliant child. Sharon Von Stone was born March 10, 1958, in a small town, Mayville, Pennsylvania. Walking and talking at 11 months, reading complex literature by 5, and registering a certified genius IQ of 154. But in a modest working-class town, a brain like that wasn't a gift, it was a target. She was the ultimate outcast, bullied, misunderstood, and completely alienated. By the time she enrolled in college on a scholarship at just 15, she was floating through lecture halls like a ghost who didn't belong anywhere. She buried herself in books to escape the cruelty of the playground, but literature couldn't protect her from the horrors behind closed doors. Decades later, Sharon would finally break her silence on the darkest chapter of her origin, enduring horrific abuse at the hands of her maternal grandfather. It was a profound betrayal of innocence that taught her at a devastatingly young age that monsters don't live in fairy tales. Sometimes they share your bloodline. As if the emotional trauma wasn't enough, her physical endurance was tested just as violently. At 14, while trying to break a horse, she was violently thrown, striking a clothesline that ripped across her neck. The injury was brutal, leaving a permanent scar and doctors fearing long-term damage. However, Sharon Stone didn't break. She stepped onto the local pageant circuit, taking the title of Miss Crawford County, and eventually landing as a candidate for Miss Pennsylvania in 1976. It was there, in the town of Hershey, that a completely unscripted, almost mythic encounter altered her trajectory forever. A 17-year-old Sharon crossed paths with none other than Muhammad Ali. The heavyweight champion was in town working on his biopic, The Greatest, and he didn't just notice her, he recognized a force of nature. Ali actually picked up a phone, dialed Sharon's strict blue-collar father, and offered her a role in his movie. He confidently predicted that this girl was going to be a massive movie star. Joseph Stone, ever the practical tool and die maker, scoffed at the most famous athlete on earth, flatly telling him, "She's not going to be in movies." Ali's response was an absolute prophecy. "You may think she can't, but she can. You cannot hide that girl under a bushel basket. Her light is too bright." When a pageant judge echoed that exact sentiment, bluntly advising Sharon to quit college and go to New York, she didn't hesitate. She dropped out, moved in with an aunt in New Jersey, and by 1977, she had secured a contract with the prestigious Ford modeling agency. From the outside, it looked like a glamorous escape. But the fashion industry in the late 70s wasn't a sanctuary. It was a meat grinder. She was living out of suitcases, traveling between Milan and Paris, navigating a business that reduced women to measurements and dollar signs. Yet, this is where her dark past became her armor. The abuse she had survived in her childhood gave her a terrifyingly thick skin, an absolute necessity to survive the casual, everyday predatory behavior of photographers and agents. She wasn't treated like a genius. She was treated like a mannequin. And modeling wasn't enough to contain a mind like hers. She wanted to act. So she packed her bags again, returned to New York, and literally stood in line to be an extra in Woody Allen's Stardust Memories in 1980. She didn't even have a line of dialogue. She was just the pretty girl on the train blowing a kiss. But the camera lingered on her. She left an impression. When she finally made the leap to Los Angeles in the 1980s, expecting to conquer Hollywood, she hit a concrete wall of misogyny. This is the era of her life that most people forget. For a decade, she was trapped in the purgatory of B-movies and terrible scripts. The studios didn't know what to do with a woman who was smarter than the directors hiring her. She was routinely told by executives and managers that she wasn't, and, to use the crass Hollywood terminology of the time, fuckable enough to be a leading lady. They looked at this stunning, brilliant woman and decided she was too bookish, too awkward, or perhaps just too intimidating. There is a hideous, borderline abusive story she later shared about her very first speaking role in Irreconcilable Differences, 1984. She was required to do a topless scene. The director didn't clear the set. He didn't offer her an intimacy coordinator. He left her exposed in front of dozens of crew members while a voice bellowed from the dark, complaining about the camera angle. The humiliation was profound. She was 26 years old, and she realized that in Hollywood, being beautiful didn't protect you. It just made you a target. Around the same time, she sought stability in her personal life, marrying television producer Michael Greenberg in 1984. But when you are a woman constantly fighting to be seen as a human being rather than an object, playing the role of a quiet, supportive Hollywood wife feels like wearing a straitjacket. The marriage collapsed in 3 years. Sharon was approaching her 30s, an age where Hollywood usually starts discarding actresses, and she was still largely unknown, bruised by bad marriages, bad movies, and a system rigged against her. But instead of quitting, she did what survivors do. She adapted. She realized that if the industry wanted her to be a ruthless, hypersexualized weapon, she would give them exactly what they asked for, but on her own terms. In 1990, director Paul Verhoeven cast Sharon as Arnold Schwarzenegger's lethal kickboxing wife in Total Recall. For the first time, audiences saw the genuine danger behind her eyes. She was a revelation. But that was just the appetizer. 2 years later, Verhoeven offered her the lead in a movie that practically every A-list actress in Hollywood had rejected because the script was deemed absolute career suicide. The movie was Basic Instinct. Michael Douglas, the megastar attached to the project, didn't even want to test with her. To him, she was still a B-movie nobody. But Sharon fought for the role of Catherine Tramiel with a terrifying ferocity. She accepted a meager salary, $500,000 compared to Douglas's $14 million, because she knew the board was finally set, and this was her move. When the film hit theaters in 1992, it didn't just break the box office, it fractured the culture. Sharon Stone became a global obsession overnight. But the specific scene that cemented her status as a cinematic immortal was born out of a profound, calculated betrayal by the director she trusted. We all know the interrogation scene, the white dress, the cigarette, the uncrossing of the legs. But what the audience didn't know was the sheer psychological gaslighting happening behind the camera. Verhoeven asked Sharon to remove her underwear, claiming the white fabric was reflecting the studio lights and ruining the shot. He promised her, looking her dead in the eye, "We can't see anything. It's just a shadow." She trusted him. She shouldn't have. Months later, Sharon sat in a test screening room packed with agents, lawyers, and powerful studio executives. As the scene played, the truth was magnified on a 50-foot screen. She hadn't been protected. She had been exploited. She was completely exposed in front of a room full of strange men. The humiliation was suffocating. But Sharon didn't cower, and she didn't cry. She stood up, walked directly into the projection booth, and slapped Paul Verhoeven across the face. Then she walked out and called her lawyer. She ultimately allowed the scene to stay in the film because, intellectually, she knew it fit the sociopathic nature of the character. She made a strategic choice. She had finally kicked down the door to the A-list. She was reported to have earned $6 to $8 million per film by the mid-1990s, with back-end add-on contributing to her total earnings in the 8 figures. She made intelligent investments by diversifying her portfolio to include production, endorsements, and real estate. If Basic Instinct made her a global phenomenon, 1995's Casino made her bulletproof. Director Martin Scorsese didn't want a centerfold. He wanted a force of nature. As Ginger McKenna, the tragic, drug-addicted hustler married to a mafia boss, Sharon didn't just act. She bled on screen. She held her own against heavyweights like Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, stealing every single scene she was in. The industry that had spent the last 3 years treating her like a cheap novelty was suddenly forced to bow down. She earned an Academy Award nomination and won a Golden Globe. The critics were silenced. Sharon Stone had finally proved that her talent was just as lethal as her beauty. She had conquered the mountain. And as her professional life reached its absolute zenith, her personal life seemed to align in a way that felt almost too perfect. In 1998, she married Phil Bronstein, the executive editor of the San Francisco Examiner. This wasn't an impulsive Hollywood romance with a younger actor. Phil was a powerhouse in his own right, intellectual, grounded, and operating in a sphere of serious journalism that appealed to Sharon's 154 IQ. They were a formidable power couple. She moved to San Francisco to build a life with him, determined to create the one thing that had always eluded her: a real, stable family. The girl from Meadville had finally arrived. She had the Oscar-caliber career, the brilliant husband, and the sprawling mansion. But the universe, it seems, always balances a massive victory with a staggering private defeat. Behind the gates of their San Francisco estate, a devastating biological reality was unfolding. Sharon desperately wanted to be a mother, but her body was secretly fighting against her. She suffered from an autoimmune disease and endometriosis, conditions that turned the natural process of carrying a child into a battlefield. In her memoirs, she later revealed the agonizing truth. She suffered 3 late-term miscarriages. Losing a pregnancy is a quiet, devastating trauma, but losing 3 at 5.5 months along is a physical and psychological torture that most people can't even fathom. She had to endure the horrific process of 36 hours of labor to deliver children she knew were already gone. She was at the peak of her fame, adored by millions, yet she felt entirely broken on the inside, failing at the one thing she wanted more than any golden trophy. But Sharon has always been a woman who refuses to be defeated by biology. If her body wouldn't give her a child, her sheer willpower would. In 2000, she and Phil made the decision to adopt. They welcomed a baby boy, Roan Joseph Bronstein. The photos from that year are some of the most genuinely happy images of Sharon's entire life. Holding her son, she looked softer, more grounded, completely detached from the icy persona Hollywood demanded of her. She was a mother. The puzzle was complete. She had outsmarted her trauma, her industry, and her own body to build a paradise. But this paradise was built on a fault line, and she had no idea that a biological earthquake was about to level her entire existence. On September 29, 2001, Sharon was struck by a headache so severe it felt like a literal gunshot to the skull. It wasn't a migraine, it was a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage. Her vertebral artery had ruptured. For 9 agonizing days, she lay in a hospital bed while her brain continuously bled. When the doctors finally took her into surgery, they gave her a 1% chance of survival. 1%. She beat the unbelievable odds and survived the operating table. But the woman who woke up was not the untouchable queen of the 1990s. The hemorrhage had butchered her nervous system. She couldn't walk. She couldn't read. She had lost the hearing in her left ear. Her vision was distorted, and her famously sharp, rapid-fire speech was reduced to a severe, agonizing stutter. The woman with a 154 IQ had to sit with a therapist and learn the alphabet all over again. In a decent world, this is the moment when a community rallies. But Hollywood is not a decent world. Hollywood is a business of aesthetics, and sickness is considered a liability. As Sharon fought for the basic ability to form a sentence, her phone went completely dead. The A-list directors who used to beg for her time suddenly vanished. The studios quietly dropped her from pending projects. She wasn't treated like a human being fighting for her life. She was treated like a defective product that had passed its expiration date. She went from being the highest paid actress in the world to entirely invisible. During her 7-year recovery, she lost her $18 million savings just trying to stay afloat and pay her medical bills. But the professional exile was merely a warm-up for the personal slaughter. Instead of holding her hand through the darkest valley of her life, Phil Bronstein, the powerful husband she thought was her rock, filed for divorce in 2003. She was still physically fragile, struggling to regain her footing in the world, and the man who vowed to love her in sickness and in health simply walked out the door. Yet the universe had one final, unspeakable cruelty left in store. The divorce triggered a vicious custody battle over their adopted son, Roan. Sharon had endured 3 late-term miscarriages and 36 hours of dead labor just to become a mother. Roan was her entire universe, the only light during her grueling physical rehabilitation. But inside the courtroom, her legacy was weaponized against her. Bronstein's legal team ruthlessly dismantled her character. The judge ultimately awarded primary custody to her ex-husband, using her artist lifestyle and the very fact that she was not enough health and finance to adapt that. There was even a moment where the court cited her roles in movies like Basic Instinct to paint her as an unfit mother. By 2004, Sharon Stone was a ghost haunting her own life. She had lost her health. She had lost her multi-million-dollar career. She had lost her husband. She had lost her life savings. And, most devastatingly. She had lost her only son. The woman who had once commanded the world with a single gaze was left sitting alone in an empty house, physically broken, financially bleeding, and completely discarded by a society that only loved her when she was perfect. When you lose everything, you are left with a terrifying choice. You either lie down in the ashes, or you use them to build something new. Sharon Stone chose to build. The industry thought she was finished. They assumed she would fade into the tragic folklore of Hollywood casualties. They fundamentally underestimated the grit of the girl from Pennsylvania. Sharon didn't wait for a studio executive to rescue her. She rescued herself. Her first act of defiance was reclaiming her motherhood. The court may have taken her primary custody of Roan, but they couldn't legislate the fierce biological need she had to be a mother. In 2005, while still recovering from her stroke and battling the stigma of being an aging, discarded star, she adopted her second son, Laird Vaughn. A year later, she adopted her third son, Quinn Kelly. She wasn't trying to replace Roan. She was expanding her heart to prove that her capacity to love was larger than a judge's gavel. She became a single mother to 3 boys, raising them with a fierce, unapologetic devotion. And in a beautiful twist of poetic justice, as Roan grew older, he eventually chose to live with her. The mother who was deemed unfit ultimately became the matriarch of a deeply bonded, fiercely loyal family. She didn't just survive the loss of her child. She built an empire of motherhood entirely on her own terms. But healing the body and the family was only half the battle. She still had to heal her soul. For years, Hollywood tried to keep Sharon in a box, offering her insulting, faded echoes of her past femme fatales. But she refused to be the punchline of a tragic industry ending. She slowly clawed her way back onto the screen, taking on complex, commanding roles in television and indie films that proved her raw talent had survived the stroke completely intact. Then, she decided to reclaim her narrative entirely. In 2021, she dropped a bomb on the industry by releasing her memoir, The Beauty of Living Twice. It became a massive global bestseller. This wasn't some sanitized, PR-approved celebrity diary. It was a brutal, unapologetic reckoning. She finally told her own truth, burning down decades of tabloid lies with her own words. But her most profound resurgence didn't require a script or a publisher. She picked up a paintbrush. Returning to her childhood passion, she began painting up to 17 hours a day, pouring the terror of the ICU and the agony of her custody loss onto massive canvases. Her art exhibitions became a genuine sensation. In the art world, nobody cared about her age or the length of her skirt. They cared about the depth of her mind. Through her acting, her writing, and her art, Sharon didn't just re-enter the spotlight. She built a brand new one, entirely on her own terms. She also dedicated herself to the grueling, unglamorous work of AIDS research with AMFAR, taking the baton from her late friend, Rock Hudson. She used the lingering embers of her fame not to secure movie deals, but to raise millions of dollars for people fighting for their lives, because she knew exactly what it felt like to be abandoned by society when you are sick. Today, in 2026, Sharon Stone is 68 years old. She lives in a sprawling, light-filled Beverly Hills home, not with a powerful, dominating husband, but with her sons, her dogs, and her art. The woman who was brutally punished for her beauty has aged into a profound, untouchable grace. She doesn't use Botox to hide her scars. She wears them like battle medals. She survived the meat grinder of the 80s, the manipulative traps of the 90s, and the near-fatal decimation of the 2000s. She didn't just survive Hollywood, she transcended it. Sharon Stone's life is the ultimate cautionary tale about the punishment of beauty, but it is also a masterclass in resilience. Hollywood has a habit of building pedestals out of glass, just waiting for the moment you shatter so they can sweep up the pieces and move on to the next girl. They tried to reduce a genius to a pair of crossed legs, and when she dared to get sick and age, they tried to erase her entirely. But Sharon proved that when the world strips away your fame, your fortune, and your health, the only thing that keeps you alive is the foundation you built inside your own mind. She was sold to us as a fantasy, but she survived as a profound, unshakable reality. She didn't wait for the industry to give her a happy ending. She picked up a brush and painted it herself. When you look at Sharon Stone today, do you see the cinematic icon, or do you see the warrior who refused to be discarded? Share your thoughts on her incredible journey in the comments below. Your perspectives are the heartbeat of this community. If you appreciate stories that look past the red carpet and into the real grit of these legends, please hit that like button and subscribe. We're here to keep the truth alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.